I'm sorry I didn't make dinner last night. American Airlines had me stuck in Charlotte a few extra hours. It's good to be back. I recall being here last year when I was mocking the Russia impeachment investigation. Russia was so last year. Now we're on to the Ukraine impeachment. I was up late last night, waiting to see whether Lamar Alexander would vote to extend the witness parade in this bizarre trial we have going on in the Senate. And honestly, I did not know Lamar Alexander was still in politics until last night. I remember he ran against Bob Dole back in was that in the 80s? He ran against, early, I don't know, he ran against Dole in the 90s and now was back in the limelight, and it appears that the national nightmare of impeachment may finally be coming to a close so that we can get to the work. There has truly been a spillover effect to what has occurred in Washington in the mistreatment of the president into some of the other important work that we have to get done. When the impeachment process began, I believed, like any other issue, it could be siloed. We could sort of do whatever we had to do to get whatever we had to get out of our system on impeachment, but that on issues relating to infrastructure, energy, telecommunications, our military, that we could find ways to make common cause and to ensure that we advance the interests of the American people. And it turns out impeachment was all-consuming. It impaired our budgeting ability. It moves us closer to a world of continuing resolutions instead of actual appropriations. And for the first time in, I think, over 40 years, we had a partisan vote of the National Defense Authorization Act out of the House Armed Services Committee. That, never happens. Usually we all agree that when it comes to standing with those who put the uniform on and fight for our country, when it comes to the national interest we have in ensuring that America is the strongest and best force in the world, we are not Republicans and Democrats. We work together, and we also recognize that in any major piece of legislation like the National Defense Authorization Act, there are going to be a few provisions that you really love and run home and talk about, and there are going to be some things you kind of got to hold your nose on and understand that it was a priority of someone else. That is the type of governing I saw occur here in the state of Florida. And unfortunately, it should occur a great deal more in Washington. So this past year, we had a partisan vote of the National Defense Authorization Act, and then finally, through the conference process, we were able to get to a work product we all supported, we're very proud of, and that I'm particularly proud provided a more than 3% raise to the people who wear the uniform and fight for our country. Two of my colleagues from our congressional office are here, Adam Griffin and Nate Nelson. Nate's our Director of Military Affairs, Adam's our Deputy Director of Military Affairs, and I believe you heard from Nate earlier in the program, and they're here to serve all of you. They're here to serve our community and our partners who support the mission. And really our office has three pillars when we approach our military affairs. First is to ensure that we do everything we can for those behind the gate. I represent more troops than anybody else in Congress. I take that obligation very seriously. There is no obligation I have that is more important than ensuring that those who are wearing the uniform, who are behind the gate, get the support from our office that they need. Second is to stand with those of you in the private sector who support the mission and the warfighter and our broader economic development in Northwest Florida, throughout our state and throughout the country. And then finally, to serve as Grand Marshal for the Armies of Compassion throughout our community who help with veterans, who help with Gold Star organizations. We've done everything from pairing dogs to veterans in programs, to providing housing solutions, to ensuring that those who have lost their medals and honors are reunited with them. And so we certainly ask you for your help in all of those things. But I want to start with sort of the work that we've done for those behind the gate. And really, during my time in Congress, we have had a reformation in our approach to defense policy that has inured greatly to the benefit of Northwest Florida. For quite some time prior to the Trump administration, there was this intense focus on counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, sort of duking it out on the streets of Fallujah and ensuring that we had the right capabilities and the right training and ops to go and do those types of missions. And I think that the Trump administration understood that toiling away in the Middle East, that having such an intense focus on those efforts was taking the eye off the ball when it comes to our near-peer adversaries, Russia and China. that it had us behind in critical areas like hypersonic, supersonic, 5G, AI, machine learning, where China has had a whole-of-government approach to investment, to intellectual property theft, and to development in those areas. And so the Trump administration came out and said, we are changing the national defense strategy to update our capabilities to meet our near peers. We are no longer going to sort of get treed by the chihuahuas in the Middle East. We are going to ensure that we're ready to meet the challenges of our true adversaries. What has that meant for us? You know, we had, prior to my time in Congress, been enduring a lot of paper cuts and diminutions of our mission because you saw the research lab constrained, you saw sequestration as a wet blanket over the innovations that talented people were trying to develop to ensure that we were doing what we needed to do for next-gen systems and for all the accompanying equipment and tech that we need. Now, with a focus on China and Russia, we are in the golden era of funding at Eglin Air Force Base for research, development, test, and evaluation. The munitions work that is being done is, I think, going to be next level, and we have really reversed a trend away from the type of work that we do to now having all of the country focused on whether it's space, whether it's cyber, all that we provide. It is a tremendous source of pride for me that every major cyber warrior in the United States Navy is going to have some training at Corey. And every major cyber warrior in the United States Air Force is going to spend some time at Hurlburt. I mean, by the time we were cutting the ribbon on the new classrooms at Hurlburt for cyber warriors, we already had a requirement for more flow-through than we were even going to be able to provide. So that's great news. And by the way, as from an economic development standpoint, I know we got some economic developers in the room, this should be the whole strategy. Let's find these people who are going to have the jobs that are the most lucrative and the most leverageable, and by the way, the most portable and the most mobile in this next economy. And let's dip them in that emerald green water. Let's get some of this sand between their toes. Let's get them out there enjoying our springs and our woodlands. And let's hope that these technical warfighters that do some of their schooling and training here will want to come back to Northwest Florida, make this forever home, and become a part of our community and enhance our contribution to the fight in that unique way. That should be an all-in strategy from an economic development standpoint. So that's some of the work going on behind the gate. Since I became the congressman in this district, we've seen over a $1 billion increase in procurement that has flown through our installations. I mean, that is the high water that raises all of the boats here. That type of work ensures that we got the brightest minds that want to live here. I always joked when we moved here, we used to have a fair shot at winning the science fair when we lived in Miami. But then you move to Northwest Florida and everybody's parents are rocket scientists, and really your odds go down when your dad's a hospital executive. So we did our best. We were competitive down in Miami, but up here there is a special intellectual capital that is not just a feature of our community. I believe it is the defining characteristic of our community. We also have seen a real increase in the number of people. Following my first term in the United States Congress, we had more than 7,000 additional folks who were wearing the uniform active duty military station in Northwest Florida installations. By the end of my second term, we will have more than 25,000 additional active duty military who call Northwest Florida home. That is something to be incredibly proud of, that we get to be the host of that here. We also have seen the Coast Guard mission almost double to over 5,000. And we're also pushing a lot of dirt, so if there are really three ways to ensure that we're doing the job. One is procurement, the second is people, and the third is pushing dirt, because if you get more military construction in this area, then you're going to sink in more of that mission here, and you're going to ensure the longevity of that mission. So we try to go and fight for every military construction dollar that we can possibly find. One project that I'm particularly excited about is going to be the investment around Whiting that Leonardo is going to do to create the new training platform for the roto training that occurs in and out of Whiting. And that's important for a few reasons. First, those helicopters that those guys are flying now, I am concerned about their safety. Almost every other day, you are having one of the helicopters that take off at Whiting have some sort of alert where it's having to come back to the base on a truck. That is unacceptable for our training students in and out of Whiting. They are training on analog systems and then having to go to digital platforms. That is not an effective way to do business. A lot of the commanders at Whiting are saying, yeah, I trained on that helicopter. Not that make, not that type, that exact helicopter when I came through here. And we've worked really hard on this. Our team has in the NDAA. We finally got the Navy to do an off-the-shelf procurement, which is not an easy thing to do. They always want to go and do all the design, but they're coming off the shelf with the Leonardo project. And the fantastic news is, thanks to the great work of Triumph Gulf Coast, which my dad chairs, and the Santa Rosa County community, we now are going to be able to have major investment from Leonardo to do a lot of the MRO, to do a lot of the construction right in Santa Rosa County. And that is so important because I know there are a lot of folks at Fort Rucker at the Army that would love to soak that mission up into Alabama. We are going to defend it with a whip and a chair, and this investment ensures that we are going to have great health and great growth for the Whiting mission for many years to come. In addition to that Whiting mission, the Air Force Research Lab will see $12 million enhancement to their virtual warfare munitions simulator, additional $38 million for RDT&E for a cyberspace test facility, construction beginning in August of 2020. With the Gulf Test Range, we are now through phase 2 of 4 phases to fully upgrade the Gulf Test Range. This is the crown jewel of the military mission in Northwest Florida. It is the platform that allows us to have all of this other testing and contracting work flow through our community. And all in, 2019 is going to bring about $197 million in military construction funds to Eglin Air Force Base. So pretty epic year for us. Hurlburt Field in 2019 will see about $108 million in MILCON. A vast majority of that is in the AMU and weapons hangar systems for that SOF mission. And there's also going to be a combined ops facility and a maintenance training facility within that $108 million. The mission at Hurlburt is one I'm very bullish about. That mission is growing a great deal, and the key to keep growing that mission is the work that we're doing in Okaloosa County, again with Triumph, to ensure that we get the Highway 85 traffic system resolved. Because Hurlburt is very landlocked. There's not a lot of additional land, and the land that they do have access to, it's, I think they found a salamander or a lizard or something on there, and we're not going to be able to touch that until well after my time in Congress is concluded. And so we have to be able to build these facilities up Highway 85. And of course, with the nature of that AFSOC mission, it's a lot of global response, disaster response. You cannot, a lot of those deployment times are 8 hours or less. They got to be ready to go from the moment they take that order to when they've got to deploy and get downrange in some way. And so you cannot have a situation where people are like an hour and a half on Highway 85. And so I'm grateful that Okaloosa County has prioritized this as their #1 economic development issue to get the Highway 85 traffic situation solved, and that will allow that continued investment in that AFSOC mission to really build upon these additional facilities and these additional capabilities that we got coming. In terms of upcoming MILCON priorities, this may sound de minimis, but this is really important. We need a child care facility for 7th Group up 85 in Crestview. Right now, the child care for toddlers for 7th Group is on Main Eglin. That does not work, especially with just the nature of that mission, the time of those deployments, the limited time people have when they're home, and us wanting to make the most of that, and the fact that we're talking about toddlers. They should be closer to their parents, and so that is going to be one of our top priorities for 7th Group to support that mission, and really to support the military families who are every bit in this fight as much as those who are putting the uniform on. Additionally, phase 3 of the Gulf Test Range is something very important, something that we will have to fight for very hard for this reason. We compete with the folks out west for the test mission, right? The Speaker of the House is from San Francisco, and the chairman of the Armed Services Committee is from the Pacific Northwest. And so we got some headwinds in dealing with enhancing those assets of ours. Fortunately, President Trump, the administration, have been funding these phases in their budget, and I think that is the best asset that we have to leverage to ensure that we continue that development. And I would say last but most certainly not least is the MILCON that we still need at Tyndall. It was a major priority of mine to personally bring the president to Tyndall, to show him around. Of course, the president looked at all of it and said, how much money do you need? I could definitely rebuild all this for less. I was just, no, Mr. President, costs a little more on a military base. It's like, I've built stuff all over the world. But the good news is that Secretary Barrett has agreed to continue the commitment to Tyndall that we certainly saw from the prior Secretary of the Air Force, Heather Wilson, when she just moved hundreds of millions of dollars in O&M money into the rebuild effort so that the contracting could continue to roll there. It's still a lot to do, still a Herculean task, and though it's not technically my district, those are undoubtedly our people, and we're going to fight for them, or we're going to fight right alongside them and ensure that we do that. So that's our kind of behind the gate message. I would say in terms of the military support community, Captain Nelson laid out for you what our top priority is, and that is the Weapons Integration Testing Center, the WITIC, that we believe would elevate Northwest Florida to the highest level of coordination and community engagement to keep all of these contracting and procurement dollars here. And in many ways, we are following the example of Huntsville. You know, the folks in Huntsville figured out that if you work well with the contracting office and you have contracting provisions that require assets within 50 miles of the gate, that is a very good thing for Huntsville. And they have, I think, leaned into that with a whole of government approach from their education system, from their chambers of commerce, from their community college systems, and then obviously recruiting high-end talent to the mission that they have. So for us to steal their playbook, not reinvent the wheel, and to have that type of a synergy, we believe that the WITIC that Captain Nelson laid out would be the top priority for us to be able to have. Now, whenever you're asking for many tens of millions of dollars from the federal government, it's never a high percentage shot, but the reward is big enough that it'll be a major priority of our office, and we're hoping to be able to co-locate a lot of those military assets alongside higher ed assets, K-12 assets, and it'll really be a special thing for us to be able to keep contracting dollars here and to also just grow the talent base. That'll be a major, I think, talent attractor for Northwest Florida and gives us really the highest ceiling for capturing the value of our military mission. The other thing I would tell you is that we have a vested interest in working together to extend the moratorium on offshore oil drilling. Would you mind giving me a glass of water, Adam? I'm getting a little hoarse. See, I learned from Senator Rubio, you should always have water, right? So, our ban on drilling in the Eastern Gulf expires in 2022. So it takes an actual act of Congress to extend that to ensure that we're able to, thank you very much, to continue to use that space for all of the testing needs that we have. And by the way, our testing needs are not shrinking, they are expanding, because as the nature of munitions and weaponry changes, it turns out we don't need less room to test and operate it, we actually need more room, which is why the Gulf test range enhancements are so important. Now, there are not too many benefits to having Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House, but one is that she moved my bill along with Francis Rooney and Congresswoman Castor to make permanent the ban on drilling in the Eastern Gulf of Mexico. The House of Representatives has passed that legislation, and if I could ask anything of you, it would be please encourage our senators to get that moratorium extension into some must-pass bill so that we can get the job done and preserve the longevity of what has made Northwest Florida so successful since Bob Sykes was the congressman for this area. There is currently a plan that I'm concerned about, and I want to tell you about. Senator Cassidy has come up with this plan. So, immediately, when someone from Louisiana, the oiliest, one of the oiliest kind of states in America, has a plan, I get a little nervous. But Senator Cassidy's plan is to preserve only those areas in the Eastern Gulf where the military has not put out a mariner's warning within the last 2 years. Now I see Colonel Heald here, he'll tell you why that is so deceptive. Because there's a lot of area where we haven't used it within the last 2 years, but we know we're going to need it. If we want to be able to compete in this, hypersonic, supersonic weapons testing type environment, we need that additional room, and so that is a very bad deal. It sounds maybe logical on its face, but it would be tragic, I think, for our mission in Northwest Florida. I would also say to our military support community, one of the big areas of growth that I think we need to work on capturing is in this area of space. You know, the creation of the Space Force is a really exciting thing to be a part of. It was awesome to be there as the president signed the NDAA, creating the Space Force. I told him, I said, well, since it's like the Trump Space Force that you created, I feel like the uniform should have gold trim. And he loved that idea. So don't be surprised if you see gold trim with the Space Force. And I knew to take credit for it in advance. But the space mission, I think, is one that can really grow in Florida. You know, we have our C6 test site, which does some really exciting work in Walton County. If we go and solve some energy resiliency issues, that mission could really, really expand dramatically. And just given our geographic position, our talent, our proximity to commercial launch, particularly here we are kind of between Texas and Cape Canaveral, I really think that there's opportunity for a great deal of leverage there, and look forward to working on it. And just one more thing I'd say about the NDAA. It ended the widow tax, which was a deeply unfair thing that I've been fighting to end for a long time, and I'm so glad we got it done. The widow tax unfairly made surviving spouses elect among benefits that they had earned. Though they had earned, you know, no one wants to earn the benefit of being a surviving spouse, but they were having to make an election there of benefits, which I just think is a terrible thing to do to somebody who has demonstrated that type of patriotism and made that type of sacrifice. And that was one of the benefits, frankly, of divided government. It forced Republicans and Democrats to work together, and ending that very unfair provision of law was one of the things that brought a lot of votes onto the bill and was very helpful to us. You know, though I work in the Armed Services Committee to always make sure that we have the most funding we have to meet any challenge and vanquish any foe, I also must share with you that I don't believe that a well-funded, well-prepared, well-equipped military has to be so well-worn. When people talk about an overexerted, over-deployed military, they're talking about us. They're talking about our community. At Hurlburt, we house the #1 most deployed wing in the entire United States Air Force. #1 most deployed. We were #3 the last time I spoke to you, now #1. 7th Group, those folks go deepest into the fight and often take some of the most serious casualties. And just days before Christmas, we had a 7th Group Sergeant Gobble, who passed away on the battlefield. And you know, we then had all these 7th Group folks come up for a service at Arlington. You know, and I think to myself just about how inspiring their bravery is, and how it really contrasts with so much of the cowardice that I see in the United States Congress, where we call upon these brave Americans, the bravest among us, the best among us, the best in our communities, to go and fight in these wars, and they compete for the chance to do so. And we just had a deployment weeks ago of over 600 people out of 7th Group into Afghanistan, 600 Northwest Florida families impacted by those deployments. And there wasn't anybody who didn't want to go. You had our Northwest Florida brothers and sisters competing for the chance to go. Because if our country needed them in the fight, they wanted to be there to put the skills and training that they had to use for the mission. And you know, I think about how that bravery contrasts to members of Congress who don't want to vote for or against these conflicts, who don't believe that the Constitution demands of us that we got to have some skin in the game, that it's not enough for politicians to just sit back and snipe at the decision-making process of an administration absent being a part of the debate and the discussion. We had on the floor just yesterday a vote on whether or not to repeal the 2002 authorization to use military force against Saddam's regime. The authorization to use this force was that the Saddam Iraq regime posed a threat to the United States because they were acquiring nuclear weapons, they had chemical and biological weapons, and that they were going to pose some attack or some threat against us. Oh, and then they like tried to assassinate George H.W. Bush. That was the justification. Saddam has been dead for more than a year. His regime has long since evaporated into history. If we cannot today declare victory over Saddam Hussein, then I don't know that any war is ever winnable. You know, I don't know that any authorization wouldn't be an authorization for a new forever war. And so I voted to repeal that authorization. I still believe that the Commander-in-Chief under Article 2 powers obviously has the authority to do things like take out Soleimani. By the way, Soleimani was one of the biggest forces trying to drag us into war. And so taking him out was the right thing to do and fully justified under Article 2, justified under the 2001 AUMF. But the notion that we would keep the Saddam authorization on the books just struck me as foolish and unworthy of the type of sacrifice I see in this area. And it's not, I had my neighbor ask me, he said, well, does this mean you're a Rand Paul on foreign policy? And though I have nothing bad to say about Senator Paul, I would say I'm more like the George H.W. Bush view of foreign policy. George H.W. Bush, I get the sense he knew how to handle a bully. When Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait, when he was showing an expansionist foreign policy, George H.W. Bush sent a clear message, and he went and punched the bully in the nose, and then that bully thought twice before doing anything else. That's very different than the approach of dealing with a bully where instead of punching them in the nose, you move in with them for 20 years and try to convince them to adopt your worldview. That to me is less productive, and that is not a realistic and rational view of foreign policy. We have spent trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Enough more than the market capitalization of Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Google combined. More than all of our nation's student loan debt and credit card debt combined. And so while I'll always stand to ensure that we've got the biggest, toughest military, pardon me if I think we ought to prioritize like securing the U.S. border with Mexico before we send the best Americans to go secure Iraq's border with Iran, or Saudi Arabia's border with Yemen, or Turkey's border with Syria. That to me is an America First foreign policy. Later today, I get to do my absolute favorite thing as a member of Congress. It is nominating young people for our service academies. I'm going to Niceville High School from here, and then I'm going to Pace High School. And in the toughest days in Congress, when I think that our nation may be off kilter and in a way that we might not be able to even get right back on the tracks, I pull out these applications of these Northwest Floridians who got the best grades, the best test scores, who were the captains of their teams, who didn't get in trouble with drugs or alcohol or any bad behavior. And what they want to do with their lives is go and serve our great country. And it inspires me to be able to be just some small part of their contribution to the fight and of their service to our great nation. And so please join me in keeping those from our community who are downrange in your prayers. Know that we love them and support them and hope they'll be reunited soon. And know that if the next generation is anything like the young folks that I'm about to go nominate today, we're in great hands and the best days for America are still ahead. Thank you all so much for having me.